now, and I will introduce Suzanne, who's going to do the introduction to what we might be hoping to see in cycling in Oxford post-COVID.
Thanks so much, Alison, and thank you to everyone. I think this is a wonderful turnout of over 100. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I'm really pleased to be here as well. Just come back from a very short, quick bike ride this evening. But really, I just wanted to firstly say that I think it really is an absolutely a pivotal time for active travel, and I think that has been recognised all the way through County Council, certainly from the dialogue I've been having with both politicians and officers as well, acknowledge that this really is an unprecedented period in which we can take positive action. I myself have obviously seen and witnessed over the last few weeks the, let's say, uptake of cycling, and I think that's been phenomenal, particularly when I've been out on rides and just seeing families, children. I've seen cycling down roads which normally would be in very, very hostile environments. I think has just been really uplifting, and I'm sure we all very, very strongly believe that we need to lock in those benefits moving forwards. Thinking at a sort of strategic level for Oxford, because I know Patrick's going to be talking in detail really about the emergency active travel funding, which is very soon to be unlocked. But really at a more strategic level, I wanted to really think about that more holistic vision. And this is something which has also come out of the dialogue with the City Council in recent days. How do we really link together these different initiatives, such as the zero emission zone, connecting Oxford, obviously the LCWIP work, which Patrick has already completed, and also this emergency active travel fund opportunity. So those really are the four themes that we're thinking about. How do we bring those together as a broad united vision really for Oxford and of course the surrounding area? On the political level, with regard to the announcement that Grant Shapps made around the unlocking of that initial 250 million tranche of funding for active travel and other obviously interventions to promote and protect public health as well in this recovery phase, we at County Council have been having a lot of discussions behind the scenes. I know that there's been a lot of wider interest in this in terms of the decisions that will be taking place. So I just wanted to assure that there have been discussions going on and that we don't yet know what the amount of funding will be available to the County Council, but there are certainly many, many suggestions, and my inbox has been very full with some excellent ideas from across the county. Also, we put out, or myself and Yvonne Constance, cabinet member, put out an active travel survey just last Friday to go out to all of our 63 county councillors across Oxfordshire. And I have been astonished actually by the response to that and to the input as well, both from city and town and parish councils, with suggestions for specific initiatives, and really trying to divide those up into those real urgent, and I have been making very firmly the point that we need to act very urgently, urgent measures within days to weeks, our medium-term changes, and then our long-term ambitions. And as I said, that really comes back to what is that whole total vision for the city and for the wider county. And I think finally, I really just wanted to say, because I know that Patrick's going to be talking in a lot of detail here, that it is obviously also a very challenging time for the County Council. It will be financially very challenging moving forwards, and we're well aware of that already. And a very challenging time, I think, for officers. So we're well aware of that in the way in which we're managing services. The other element that I just wanted to highlight is that an advertisement has just gone out for an active travel hub lead at the County Council, and that active travel hub was funded through £500,000 into the budget. That's the 2020-21 County Council budget, and I'm very keen that myself as the County Council cycling champion has input into trying to shape that role and really see how we can bring together, because we particularly noticed, and in fact I was talking to our cabinet member for environment about this today, that there's still a real gap between sort of policy delivery and implementation around many of our cycle, particularly our infrastructure projects, but more broadly as well. And finally, just to say that the also have been in touch with our comms teams, and we want to look at some really exciting and interesting and innovative messaging around cycling, really trying to broaden that reach, and as I said, to lock in what we've really witnessed as a community and as campaigners and activists as well over the last few weeks. So thank you. That was really what I wanted to say before Patrick's talk, but I'm very happy to take any questions.
So are there any questions of Suzanne before we move on to Patrick? I'd probably put them up in a chat unless you're, because I can't see everybody, so to see the hands. Russ?
Yes, please.
Graham?
Well, mine's a very quick one. Saying I've just been on a Zoom with Brian Deegan and various others, and one of the issues that was coming up from some local authorities was an insistence on gold plating schemes, both taking all the money and also taking time. And so one of the questions, requests to Suzanne would be to make sure that we don't end up with gold plating and don't get very much.
Suzanne?
You've probably gone for a couple of
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that what quite a lot of feedback, but what the real challenge has been, I think, is really highlighting the urgency and actually getting an understanding, a clear understanding. And I sent
Russ,
out.
Sorry to interrupt. Russ, can you mute yourself, please?
Thanks, Damien. It's quite loud typing. So I think the urgency, and Damien Hayward has been working with me on this really to articulate to our members exactly what this means in terms of the emergency fund. And for example, I sent out some pictures of what is being done elsewhere, so that they can actually recognise this, because it is quite different. Things such as, you know, pop-up cycle lanes protected with cones and wands, for example. For those who are very familiar with long-term schemes, that's quite a difficult concept. One-way systems, for example, modal filters, all of that is quite an alien concept to many of our elected members. So that's been something which I've been working on. But yes, and I think there is a discussion to be had about, should we let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and how do we approach that, and where do we sort of compromise in the short to medium term, and where do we experiment? So I think it's an important question, and it's something which I'm having closely with our cabinet member as well.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I suggest we move on. Suzanne, there may well be questions to you at the end. And so if we now move on to Patrick, who's going to talk about really mainly the LCWIP, but I think other aspects of the emergency funding. So I'll hand over to Patrick to take us from here. And I'm muted.
Is it? Am I on? Yes. All right. Hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and I must admit this is my first Zoom meeting, so I hope all goes well. In fact, what I'm going to talk about is there's going to be 3 sections. I was going to talk about the history of cycling in terms of paradigm shift, but I've condensed that into 3 slides just to give you an idea of how actually council commitment has actually led to changes in cycling. Then I was going to say, what are the implications of this COVID-19 guidance, and then take a break, get questions, and then finally go on to talk about the actual examples in the new guidance from government. So probably, and another apology, normally I know exactly how long my presentation is going to last. I've been so busy because of this, all this guidance that's come out, that I haven't actually ever gone through these slides, so they may be too long. So I may have to speed up or we miss out some. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So I'm now going to go and share screen, and I hope this works. Tell me if it doesn't. So that's this one. Do I share? Good. And is that, can you see the screen here? I hope.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
So,
we can.
so this is a very brief conceptual history of cycling in the 3 slides. And paradigm shift, in fact, is very relevant. It's a kind of a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions, which in a way, there's a whole history. And so first of all, it's useful, I think, to look at the 5 factors that kind of, I think, evidence shows that increased cycling. You need a good high density urban realm. Well, Oxford has got that, basically. Then we need a cycle network, a very visible, identifiable, high quality cycle network, which Oxford, we've been pairing in the LCWIP. So that's good. The third element, which often gets missed out if you really want to increase cycling, is traffic management. Measures such as road closures, restricted road capacity, cost of parking, which all give kind of comparative advantage to cycling. Fourth element, and it's the most difficult really, is the cultural norm among a local population, which supports and promotes cycling, and that people increasingly kind of build their lives around cycling. Now, the Oxfordshire Cycle Survey, which we did last year, actually shows this is beginning to happen in Oxford. And the Netherlands is the kind of paradigm where people really, from birth, build their lives around cycling. But the one I'm going to partly talk about is council commitment. And that is actually another key to how things change. So it depends on council commitment, because they have an influence on all the other 4, some more slowly than others. So we've developed this, what we call a CAT scale, commitment to active travel scale, which goes from E to A. E was the norm for many years, where basically, and I've tried to give acronyms so one remembers it. You ignore road cycling. Then there's a D, the do minimum, the kind of half-hearted doing things. C is getting quite serious about cycling. You're committed, you're trying to get a comprehensive network. And then B is called brave and bold, because at that point it's the transition between a car culture and a cycling culture. And you have to make some brave decisions to actually implement something. And finally, we go on to the ambitious aspirational, which in a few places like Groningen and Utrecht and places like that, they've got to a point where actually cycling is becoming the norm, and it's the whole society's movement. And underneath is the kind of percentage of active travel journeys you would expect if the council were to follow those. But I should say you could do the CAT scale to politicians, obviously, and policies, but also, like I do acronyms, public workers, so council officers, but also the population itself has to come along with they have to move with the actual CAT scale. And this chart this has taken many hours to produce this chart, because over the last 6 months or so, I've been trying to push back our data on cycling as far back as I can go. And to some extent, I happen to have quite a lot of rather precious old documents from Oxford. But so we've got back here for cycling all the way back to 1939, when I haven't actually got a figure against here, when cycling's actually a higher level than it has been since. This is kind of extrapolated, and for motor cars, it's all the way back to 1923. So cycling has done that, and traffic. This is going through the inner cordon, basically, 2 ways through the inner cordon. It's done that. The key, just to show, so here we had a long period. First of all, got ignored, and then there was a period when basically the expectation was, and almost the hope was, that cycling would disappear. 1973 was a key point when the balanced transport policies became in Oxford, and in a sense they jumped a CAT scale, because a lot of people, most places, continued to D, if anything. And then in 1999, we had the Oxford Transport Strategy, closing of High Street, which was a brave decision and then potentially in 2 years' time, we would have had the Connecting Oxford, which in a sense would have been even another, almost getting us onto the A level. But then suddenly COVID-19 intervened. So one day I can come back and do all that history in much greater detail, but I think it's more important we go straight on to what is happening now, the COVID-19. So this next section looks at what does it actually mean for cycling? What are these challenges? What's happening? So we're going to look at, and here's an image by my partner for what's been happening over the last 4 or 5 weeks. Because what suddenly is, it's the car has been caged, and many of you probably noticed that you can begin to hear birdsong. But actually over the next few months, that car is going to, that cage is going to get opened up. So we are moving into a different kind of time, which is quite a challenging and quite a risky time, really. You can express how the car has been caged in a different way. This is the actual car travel in Oxford. There's when COVID-19 started, more or less. So it's been kind of around about 60% lower than it's the normal basically before that point. And which it's actually, that is over the whole of Oxford. So in the city centre, it's something like 80% down. But it's a kind of unprecedented reduction in car use. Unlike probably many places outside Oxford, cycle use and pedestrian use has also gone down. It's kind of about an equal percentage. So this is cyclist use and pedestrian use. That's when the lockdown more started. So once again, it's come down about 60% between the two. So Oxford is actually, I think, a slightly different experience from places outside Oxford. To go on. So the big thing is the Ghent Shaps, who's the Secretary of State for Transport, his announcement in 9th of May, and I'm going to quote quite a lot from, but it's important one understands what this guidance is. So it's fast tracked, and it's statutory guidance. Statutory, that's an important word. That's statutory, and it's effective immediately, and it will tell councils to reallocate road space for significantly increased numbers of cyclists and pedestrians. Statutory means local authorities must take regard to this guidance when exercising their network management duty under the Act. Or, in other words, it sets out what local authorities must do to comply with the law. So probably, in a way, this guidance is the strongest guidance ever issued by a government to local authorities in terms of walking and cycling. I'm sure it is, in fact. And so it's a once in a generation opportunity to make lasting transformative change, and expects, all these kind of words, local authorities to make significant changes in their road layouts to give more space to cyclists and pedestrians. And there are 3 elements to this. So first of all, areas of high levels of public transport use, that certainly applies to Oxford, should take measures to reallocate road space to walking and cycling to encourage active travel and to enable social distancing during restart. And then there's another paragraph with as the country gets back to work, our public transport capacity is severely restricted this time. Our trains and buses could become overcrowded and our roads gridlocked. And I'm going to look into what that means. So for social distancing, and they helpfully explain it's keeping 2 meters apart when outdoors. It should be noted, in case anyone's worried, the risks of transmissibility outdoors is quite low. There's a very good, it's well worth reading this, this link here. So basically, you'd have to be in the same airstream for about 5 minutes outside. So unless somebody coughs over you or sneezes over you, and you keep a relatively distance, it's not it's a very minimal risk. So there's no real concern walking and cycling if there's enough space. And I've kind of looked into on the basis of what used to be like. Obviously I don't know exactly what it's going to be and what it is like at the moment. But space in terms of what was Oxford like, I kind of identified places where there's insufficient space for socially distanced and also very high pedestrian or cycle flows, and or places where there's got a critical pinch point, which if you're coming, let's say, from an area, it's hard to avoid. And in the maps that you follow, pedestrians in red and cyclists in green, though in many cases they affect both of them. So the city centre really is the key challenge. So we take here Magdalen Bridge. Basically, Magdalen Bridge, you can't walk over, at least in normal times, and as people go back to work, it may quickly get like that, without really having to compromise your social space. And as cyclists equally, you also having to overtake other cyclists or be beside alongside the pedestrians. Going up here, we have the same problem top of High Street and St Aldhates with the bus queues. And over here, there's some pinch points there going up Long Wall Street, and then St Giles Street's okay, but once you get into George Street and High Bridge Street, the narrow footways, enormous number of pedestrians, and here are the shops, another enormous number of pedestrians. Some of the pathways are also really too narrow. There's the bridges coming here by the station, the bridges coming here. So there are lots of places. Really the key issue of social distancing is happening in Oxford Centre, or will be happening in Oxford Centre. As you go out, there are, I think, and I dare say there are lots of other places, but I think the number of places become, there are fewer places. I mean, the canal path is insufficient width. The North Oxford cycle path is insufficient width there. There's narrow footways getting onto Port Meadow. There's narrow footways, and if you're going over that bridge there. In West Oxford, the main issues I think are coming in on Botley Road near the station and going over those bridges. In South Oxford, once again, it's approaching Folly Bridge, and that fact there's a very narrow footway the whole length there. And also there's just getting onto the river path there. And also actually coming off the river path, there's another narrow bit there. In East Oxford, the footways are quite crowded and narrow there. And St Clement's is equally very, very congested. Further out in the Cowley area, there's the John Allen Centre. You don't live around there, you won't know, but there's a pathway going in there, which is hundreds of people normally every day going into that John Allen Centre. There's the Boundary Brook, which is too narrow. Getting onto the river there, it's too narrow. The bridge leading into Littlebore is very narrow, and equally there's subways there which are narrow. And finally, Headington, the subways going into Risinghurst and Barton. I mean, you can't socially distance on them, and kind of there's the narrowing going into the Marston Path. So, but I think that the issue of social distancing, it's an important issue, which is certainly going to. But I think the main focus of the challenge will be the city centre. I'm now going to move on to the next issue, which is kind of an interesting one. It's the impact of lower bus use. The government says we should consider all other forms of transport before using public transport. And I think in this case, the transmission risk is actually much higher than outside. And that's kind of based on a BBC News article. So I dare say Suzanne might have more guidance on this. But what does taking into that mean? What does it mean for Oxford if basically buses can only take 20% of passengers, which is what is recommendation? And if you take the assumption is you've got the same number of buses and the same number of people travelling, which obviously won't happen for a while, but as people return to work and shops open, the potential will increase. What actually happens? First of all, Oxford is actually quite unusual in some ways. This is a chart of various towns about the size of Oxford. And this is the census travel showing the percentage of people who live within the urban area who travel into the town centre, the city centre, whatever. And this is
walking. So Oxford is 25% like Cambridge. Lots of people walking in Norwich and Ipswich, and Bedford and Wickham also have higher levels, which actually is another factor, interesting factor, that actually as cycling levels increase, often walking levels don't increase because people, it's quicker to go by bicycle in many cases. But if you then take cycling, there's Oxford, the second highest level. Cambridge kind of knocks the spots off us, almost 50% of journeys by cycle, and then all the others have kind of relatively low levels of cycling. But then the interesting one is here, is bus use. In Oxford, it's 31%, where none of the others, except in Ipswich, has particularly high levels of bus use. Now, the advantage of Oxford has been that actually, as a result, we've always had, probably outside London, the lowest percentage of people going by car. As you can see, all the others, it's much higher. But that will give us new challenges. And just to understand the challenges more, this is another chart showing the same data, but now how people travel into the city centre from inside Oxford. And then this is done by each of the wards in Oxford, going progressively away, further away from the centre. So we've got Blackbird Leys is the far furthest away down to the city centre. So we've got the same thing. And here we've got, so cycling in Oxford, it peaks in the middle point, about summertime, and then declines quite a lot. So by the time you get to Blackbird Leys, only 10% of people are cycling into the city centre. Walking is a short mode, basically. So by the time you even get to like Summertown, it's down to about 10–15%. It's done. We'll look at car next. Car doesn't really increase very much. There's a certain bent, you've got 20% there. But look at bus use. Basically, as you go further away, bus use gets up and up until you get to basically 60% of people in Blackbird Leys are going to work in the city centre by bus. So that is a lot of people, basically, a lot of journeys. Just a moment, we can look at Cambridge. Cambridge has a much more, in fact, much more a Dutch level of cycling. So it's actually, the whole city is, there's kind of equal levels of cycling. Walking declines, bus use never increases that much. There's quite a lot there, but and car use increases a little bit as well. But there's Cambridge, as I say, we're not having the problems that we are going to have in a sense. I'm now going to show you two charts which are even more complicated, so I have to take you through them. Basically, I've got two charts which, first of all, one shows, and this is not from the census, this is from actual figures at the inner cordon figures. So the first one shows you what happens over 7:30, 9:30 in the morning when people and vehicles are coming into the city centre. The next one shows over the whole day two-way traffic. So one will tell you what happens in terms of peak time, and one will give you what happens over the whole of within Oxford over the overall whole day impact. And then for each chart we've got what happened pre-COVID, what we were used to, a kind of worst case scenario where all those people who can no longer get on the buses, that kind of 80% of people no longer be able to get on a bus, change into a car. I mean, that won't happen, but it gives us a worst case scenario. And then what we could call a best case scenario, where all those people who can't come on the bus transfer to a cycle, and I've thrown in some e-scootering as well. So for each scenario, we get the number of people, the number of vehicles, and a measure of road space used. And road space is a way of, there's a technical way of doing it. Basically, it measures road space by what's called a passenger car unit, which is space occupied by one car in movement, and the figures for each other vehicle. It's kind of standard figures. So my cycle's at 0.2 basically. And a bus is 3, a bus is the vehicle. So here we have the first complicated chart. So this is scenario A. This is what it used to be. This is pre-COVID. And here we have the number of people coming in the morning peak hour from 7:30, 9:30 into Oxford. That's what it was like before. And there were 19,000 people coming into Oxford over those 2 hours. In terms of vehicles, and well, just before that, 4,500 were on cycles, about 7,500 in bus, and about 5,000 were in cars.
In terms of vehicles, that's 10,500. In terms of this passenger car units, it came out as 10,000. So that 10,000 is a measure of the amount of road space that is available. You can't, over those two peak hours, there won't be any extra space. You won't be able to push that figure any higher. What happens if everyone moves into changes from bus? This is the worst case options. Everyone moves into a bus. So sorry, every bus person moves into a car. Every bus person who can't get onto the bus. And then suddenly we've got, so it's the same number of people we've assumed. We've suddenly got 16,000 vehicles, of which 9,000 are by car. And in terms of personal passenger car units, it's 15,000. So we're 5,000 units over capacity in terms of getting into Oxford. If they all move into a bicycle, we get going from 4,500 to 9,000, or almost 10,000 bicycles. And also throwing 1,000 e-scooters there. More vehicles because cars, some people have got more than one car, more than one person in a car. And the road space, it's over, and probably it wouldn't matter depending on how you load for cyclists, because if you create two columns of cyclists, it's got the efficiency of it increases much more. So it's probably it's well possible, probably. So, but it actually shows how little room there is for manoeuvre if everyone returns to the city centre. Because once you start, anybody starts going into a car, that figure goes up and up. To go on to the next one, the all-day impact, this gives an idea of the scale of numbers we're dealing with. So basically, over a day, there are 180,000 people journeys. This is two ways, so it's probably 90,000 people going one way and 90,000 going the other way. That is equivalent to 80,000 vehicle trips, and this kind of road space at 90,000. So probably 100,000 is probably, it isn't quite such capacity, but it's probably somewhere around there. Once again, if they all go into car, we suddenly end up with, well, 180,000 same, we end up 100,000 car trips trying to get in and out of centre of Oxford over the day, which is a 155,000 passenger car, well over what probably the capacity is. And in contrast, if one goes by bicycle, still quite tight in terms of space, but look at the numbers we're talking about. Suddenly we're talking about, we've got e-scoot as well, something like 100,000 cycle trips. So you're beginning at the scale of what challenge of how we're going to cope with this transfer, this inevitable transfer from buses, unless buses become overcrowded, which actually then significantly increases the risk of you taking a bus. The last time Oxford had 100,000 cars coming into it, it looked like this. This is High Street in 1961. So that is, I mean, it won't happen because High Street is no longer open, but that is how you get 100,000 cars into and out of Oxford during the day. And it's not very nice for cycling, I would say, among no pollution, nor anything else. So in summary, during the peak hour, we've got something like 5,000 cars over capacity, 6,000 people. If one transfers the car over a day, 60,000 cars over capacity, like 180,000. If it transfers to cycling and e-scooters, in the peak hours, we've got a doubling of cycling. And during the day, we've got a kind of quadrupling of cycling, which would mean we need 30,000 new cyclists. So we really we've got a huge challenge to avoid traffic chaos. It's the only conclusion that one must come to. Obviously, that won't happen in a very short time because it depends on how quickly people return to work and how quickly shops open, all those other things. So, but the more life returns to normal, unless if people cannot use buses in the same way, we have got a very big transport challenge. All right, that's the point. I was going to have a break. So I don't know if we want to break now and take questions, and then we'll go on to what the measures, what the actual government guidance is, what measures, so we understand more what the opportunities are, and also I'm going to throw in some things they didn't mention, which are quite important. So do you want to take a break now, Alison? And if
yes, I was just going to exit. I was going to exit your.
So do I just stop sharing screen?
Stop participant sharing. There we go.
Right.
So, are there anybody want to ask a question? I don't quite know how we see you. Put your hand up or unmute and say, I want to ask a question.
I did see quite a few people. Dan Levy wondered about the value of a congestion charge. I don't know if Dan would like to enlarge upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the short-term stuff is really important, but if we want a major change long-term, we need to stop cars coming in, don't we? And congestion charge is one way of doing it. Bus gates are another way of doing it. But I'm not quite sure what people's views are of how we can make the step change that we clearly do need.
Can I add to that, Dan, that we're going to hear just briefly from Scott about the potential for bus gates actually restricting traffic hugely. And I think that is something we really do need to consider as we go into the next few months and years. And Scott will do a presentation on that just briefly at the end of the Patrick session.
And the other question was whether, and I think it was Ian Johnson talking about one-way roads, or do you think that's jumping ahead?
That wasn't a question, it was just a comment, really.
Okay.
But it was to say that Liz Wade brought that up with Ian Hudspeth and Radio Oxford the other day. And I was quite surprised to hear Ian's reaction, which was not completely dismissive. But, you know, there, as other people have pointed out, that's a radical plan and needs other things like low traffic neighbourhoods in place. It's not, I don't think, I mean, if somebody wants to make it a short-term plan, but I'm not sure it's gonna fly as a let's do it next week. But I just want to get it in there.
Yeah. And then Danny wanted a bit of clarification, Danny Yee, on what one of the slides, the congestion impact slide. Danny, I don't know if you want to ask Patrick to go back to that slide. I'll just unmute Danny.
Sorry, no real question about it. I think the later slide followed up. I was wondering whether he was only covering trips from inside Oxford and not trips from outside Oxford.
Yes, it was just, no, sorry. The ones in the inner cordon are, the census ones were people living in Oxford travelling into city centre. The ones which showed the congestion were based on the inner cordon figures. So that's all traffic, all people passing through the inner cordon, which if you don't basically the level of Hollyberg Bridge, Modern Road.
So for the people coming by bus from Whitney, I think very few of those are going to transfer to cycling. So my suspicion is that either they're going to shift to working from home, they're going to keep on using buses, or they'll shift to driving. But the chances of getting many people to cycle, you know, longer distances is slim, I think. So
yes.
Really, we need to get people out of, we need ramped up intercity buses and at the expense of local buses, possibly. I don't know how the bus companies feel about that or what their plans are.
There's not been any mention of separate traffic lights for cycling. Is that something that is being considered? It's very much used in Holland, for instance.
Well, that would be the next section where I was looking at what's in the in terms of what the design, the guidance says in terms of measures we can do. Not that actually a measure. Well, I mentioned traffic lights as a whole. So I think so. The next section is to kind of understand both what the government thinks we should be doing and plus a few things I think they miss out, which are quite important, which could also be done.
Oh, thanks, Patrick. Dick Wolf and then Russ. Dick Wolf.
Well, Andy, we should probably move on after Dick.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I just asked Patrick for a comment if I could. I mean, one thing that disturbs me most about your presentation is actually on the last slide, where you say that actually, even if all bus users transfer to bikes, we still are going to be struggling for road space. Now, at the moment, we're seeing the increase in cycling precisely because there is road space. What I take from that is that we have got no hope unless we actually stop, take robust measures to stop private cars coming in at all. Would you agree?
I would say, in terms of the road space, cycling is kind of, there's the space that cyclists use, there's a step change between whether you have kind of one column of cyclists or then it become two columns of cyclists and it becomes three columns of cyclists. So there would become an issue, I think, in terms of like crossing Magdalen Bridge, if it was still restrained to collect one column, which is the moment, and possibly at 80,000, you'd actually probably start needing three columns of cyclists. So you then get the kind of point, how do you fit other vehicles with this mass of cyclists coming in? So yes, it becomes, the actual calculation of the road space becomes a bit complex when you get lots of cyclists and you have to start applying different principles. So I wouldn't, theoretically, probably, if everyone transfers to bicycle, you've still got plenty of space, but it will become, how does that space get allocated between cyclists and other vehicles? Because, yes, there is an issue, basically.
Thank you. Well, Patrick, do you want to move on to part 2 or part 3, and then we'll pick up other questions?
All right.
Thank you.
That's fine. So here I go share screen. There. Has that done it? Share. Right. Good. I hope everyone see that. Right. So I thought it'd be interesting, and because this is all very topical and very important, and basically it's occupying the council a great deal at the moment, to look at what the guidance exactly says in terms of measures and how we're going to kind of do it. I mean, the government's guidance says, you know, none of these measures are new, but they want a step change in their rollout, and that you're going as swiftly as possible, in any event within weeks, which kind of, as Suzanne already said, is a bit of a shock for people who are involved in transport planning and transport implementation. So this is what the ones on the left are actually, unless it's got in brackets or something, are literally what is in the guidance. So first of all, it says mandatory cycle lanes. Well, actually, mandatory cycle lanes you have to have TROs, but here's Magdalen Bridge, and it says widening existing cycle lanes to enable cyclists to maintain distancing. And actually, there is a real challenge at Magdalen Bridge, because in terms of social distancing, if you ride over Magdalen Bridge, which I used to do a lot, it is very often two cyclists abreast, and you are really not socially distanced as you go across. It probably, in reality, it's probably not a huge risk unless somebody decides to sneeze just at the point you're passing, but it will become quite an issue at some point. Widening existing cycle lanes to enable cyclists to maintain distance. I mean, there are many examples. This is North Oxford, where the cycle lanes in Oxford are really scandalously narrow, really. So there are examples where we can definitely widen them. Here is from the Oxfordshire Cycle Survey, the location of places where the question, they could tick a box. I mean, probably many of you did it, where it said locations of no cycle lane. And as you can see, that is well, you can very easily recognise Oxford's road network from this. There are obviously a lot of places where we don't have a cycle lane, because basically Oxford is full of quite narrow, once you get into it, quite narrow roads, and it actually creates quite a lot of challenges in terms of the balance between cycling, well, walking as well, if you start eating into the footways, bus use and car use. The question about locations of path or lane too narrow didn't get many responses. There's obviously the bit where there's the super narrow cycle lane as you approach the traffic lights on Long Street. The ones that go along, I've forgotten the name of the Parks Road, isn't it? Some people have picked up Morden Bridge, and then of some of the lanes up in South Oxford. But actually, I think the other, and also the lanes coming underneath the bridge. So actually, the other guidance, the Oxfordshire Cycle Survey does give us quite a lot of information of things that we could and should do, really. Converting traffic lanes into temporary cycle lanes. I was asked this, and I went through my mind, and actually, to be honest, I can only actually come to about 2 locations in Oxford, within Oxford's Ring Road. And here's Between Towns Road, where this is quite unnecessary four lane, well, especially going this way, 2 lanes of traffic with this rather narrow cycle lane. And in a way, it's kind of special case, but along Wanford Lane, I think it's called it, so Wanford Lane, where the extra lane has been converted into car parking. In the Oxfordshire Cycle Survey, that certainly was a lot of people complained about being in the Doring zone there. So that's once again probably a very easy, quick win that we could do. It says cones to widen footways. This is near East Oxford. That area, particularly in this bus stop, is kind of really quite narrow. So it's a case where we could kind of cone off the bus bay and let buses stop in the carriageway, I think. So that's an example. School street restricted pickup and drop off zones is, I mean, there are many cases where we could do that, and that's something that the public health people have been pushing anyway, to have these limited zones during school opening time. 20-mile-per-hour limits adopted as appropriate speed limit for many through streets in built-up areas. I think there could be a strong argument that actually the whole of Oxford's urban roads, the main roads included, are turned into 20-mile-per-hour limits. This is Italy Road, not very far up, just beyond the beyond Morden Bridge. So from then on, all the way to the Ring Road, it's a 30-mile-per-hour limit, including places where cyclists are sharing the road space. So I think there is certainly a strong argument for that. Restricting access for motor vehicles on specific streets or networks or towns, particularly town centres and high streets. Well, in a way, this comes to the Connecting Oxford proposals. One of the proposed road closures were that's along Worcester Street, another in St Cross Street, another in Oxbends. Obviously, that would have a very significant impact on traffic and, for instance, on High Bridge Street, High Bridge Street, in terms of the spacing that could be given to pedestrians and cyclists. Obviously, also very potentially quite controversial to do. And equally, modal filters, also known as filtered impermeability. This is Cricket Road in Rhymes Lane, which is actually on an Oxford cycle route. It's always been advertised as a quiet cycle route, but actually, if you go along it, especially before COVID-19, it was not in any way pleasant. It's kind of a long rat run. And in the LCWIP, I identified various potential road closures to make things like this route here. There's this Rhymes Lane one, or there's another. So to make the cycle routes, because there's potentially, with these road closures, the cycle routes could almost become traffic free, which would hugely improve their kind of cyclability and their attractiveness for many residents. And I think it's one way of squaring that circle of we need lots of people to transfer to cycling rather than car use. And we all know about low traffic neighbourhoods. Just to show, this is kind of an existing low traffic neighbourhood in Rooley Park, just to show some way. And if you walk around there, it is, you don't need to keep to the footway. Basically, there's no traffic, and it's doing low traffic neighbourhoods. Once the number, even people who do go by car, it doesn't actually generate much car use within a, so residents don't actually generate much car use in local areas. And equally within the LCWIP was proposals showing these are kind of potential, the blue lines are potential low traffic neighbourhood areas, and the purple lines are ones which it would definitely benefit the main cycle routes, and the red maintain these, the red lines are the connecting cycle routes. Additional cycle parking facilities at key locations such as outside stations, high streets, for example, by repurposing parking bays to accommodate cycle tracks. Well, the two main examples of that are actually Broad Street and St Giles, because most other car parking within the city centre is actually disabled car parking, which kind of creates another interesting set of issues. There are many reasons why Broad Street and St Giles have not been that way, but maybe this is a time when there needs to be different decisions on this. Extending advanced stop lines to the maximum permitted, which is longer than it used to be, which is 7.5 metres. I mean, the key one is the bottom of High Street, where this ASL, which is taxi, happens to be nicely sitting in. But even quite often you get a line of buses here, and there's a huge inefficiency. Actually, in terms of social distancing, often is impossible. So that's at least one example that could easily be done. And then, and this is another case there are a number of examples where basically there are still no advanced stop lines at traffic signals. There's I can't remember the actual offhand, but I've identified about 4 or 5 locations where there are traffic lights without advanced stop lights. And it also, potentially, this could be where one lane is dedicated to the cycling. Whole route corridors for buses, cycles and access only, key routes to towns and centre. Cowley Road is probably one of the busiest, both for buses, it used to be for buses and also for cyclists. And I think it's always been a special case. I think in a way there is it would be, I think, eligible, let's put it that way, to be looked at whether there's something could be done to actually really reduce traffic along Cowley Road. So it says identifying permanent schemes already planned, for example, under local cycling walking infrastructure plans. Well, this is the cycle network plan. So in a way, Oxford is ahead of the game, that actually there's already a whole set of plans for implementing cycle routes in Oxford. E-scooters. The government is pushing forward the use of trial rental e-scooters. I will add that actually only the rental once, if it happens, which I think it is quite a possibility will happen, but only rental e-scooters will be permitted, and this person will still be legal on their own e-scooter. My observation of e-scooters, and I've done a report to, which is going to the Cabinet to Yvonne Constance tomorrow, is that e-scooters are very much like bicycles, except because you don't have to do any work, which actually attracts it it actually widens its attraction, discounting public health reasons. And this is a kind of chart which I created for that, for the response to the government consultation. And you think about, and it's got 4 factors. It's you've got the speed and range. So walking is quite a low speed. You go a kick scooter, they're hard work, because I've used one, so you don't get very far. bicycle and e-bikes, you can go a long way. Kind of e-scooter, I think, kind of sits somewhere in between that. In terms of, actually, I haven't, I missed it putting the, this is the, so this is, I've got my amount. So this is the size is the amount of urban space it takes up. So obviously a car is equally fast, but it takes up a huge amount of urban space. And then, so this way is the kind of how difficult it is to do, is to start doing it. I mean, in a car, you have to spend months kind of learning it, and rollerblades, which is something I can almost just do as well, you have to spend months learning how to do it. Whereas, as I understand, an e-scooter, you just get on it, and really there's nothing to learn. It's very attractive in that way. And then finally, in terms of the space, it's kind of, so the green is the public health. So green is very health. E-scooters have probably minimal public health. Standing is better in setting. But in terms of space, they're even more efficient than bicycles. You can fold them up and put them under your desk if you want to. So I think they will be attractive, to be honest, to a new audience, a niche market, but maybe quite a big niche market. And in USA, they did research into what, how much did people do, and the e-scooters, they did all these ones less often, and a bit of walking, some people say more often, but it's basically e-scooters seem to impact into car use, as well as obviously into bicycle, bus, and walking. So the measures which I think could have been in this guidance, so just which are of, I think, quite importance. First of all, the kind of use of cycle logos to create cycle streets. This is a kind of bit of a half-hearted example across Whalley Bridge. But in a way, cycle streets are one of the key ways that in Netherlands and Germany, Fahrradstraße and Fietsstraße, that Dutch cities and German cities promote cycling in narrow, relatively narrow streets. So here's a kind of German example of a Fahrradstraße, nice big symbol saying this is actually cyclist priority, and it's kind of example using that. So I think actually Oxford will be ready if we have more cyclists. The idea would be to kind of actually make cyclists in the centre, occupying the space, and cars are, as a thing, guests within it. Another thing which is obviously could be in there is the signage of the cycle routes, both in terms of identifying the cycle routes and also helping people find their way. These are both examples from TfL in London. So that's another, I think, an obvious thing that should have been in the guidance. Another thing which in a sense is better enforcement. That seems such an obvious thing anyway, but this example of kind of narrowing of road space in the city centre, here's and narrowing of footway space, particularly in a residential one. So be hard the social distance between that van. Then removal of barriers on cycle routes. The normal barrier, and this is another one which actually leads into what that becomes OCR 15. This one is Barracks Lane OCR 13. And then actually just, because in terms of social distance, widening the cycle and walking paths, because a lot of Oxford cycle paths, if you're actually trying to socially distance on them, I mean, in this case, you could walk on the grass here, but in many cases, well, why should you walk on the grass anyway? There are opportunities for actually doing widening. So it's certainly something, I mean, it would be something we couldn't do in the next few weeks, but it's certainly something that the council could commit to over the next few months, and probably. And then some which is, I think is happening is the resident controlled parking zones. But actually, I mean, this is a good example for that person there meets another person, whereas they would just be able to social distance here because of this. there's no opportunity for doing social distancing. Plus, obviously, restricting commuter parking also helps the change in behaviour. And another one, which I suspect was probably too politically contentious to include, is actually, if we're thinking on the long term, car parking and parking charges for city centres and other places are a key lever in terms of why people drive. If you do not have a car parking space, or you have to pay a lot, then there's a strong incentive to switching mode. Probably less applicable to Oxford, but in fact, outside Oxford and all the county towns, that is in a way going to be a long-term or short-term issue in terms of planning for the future. No, I'm also on the final slides here, but it is an enormous challenge for the council. First of all, we have the resources to plan and implement the changes. I mean, normally schemes are developed over years rather than days. So there's normally an enormous number of processes that go through. You have to realise that the council is under extreme pressure here to achieve these kind of changes. And then there's the question of liaising with the city and other stakeholders to get things done. And then for many things, there's statutory public consultation. And then there's and almost more important than everything, public and political support for the measures that the council can undertake. And just going on the traffic regulation order, many things, if you take away space or you close routes, you have to have a traffic regulation order, TROs for short. And there's the permanent ones, which require prior consultation and then a 21-day period of objection before you put it in. There's the experimental ones where you put them in and then you hold the consultation later, which is what was done in Walton Street. And then there's the temporary ones where you give a 7-day notice period and then you have a 14-day notification after you've paid, and then after 18 months you make them permanent or not. And the council, the government hasn't, well, it's not really allowed to, but it hasn't loosened any of these legal requirements on the council. So, I mean, that's a quick run through the different things within the government guidance, statutory guidance, as I remind you. And so I think I'll hand over to what your thoughts are, what needs doing. If you have ideas you want to share, don't send them to me, send them to that address there, because those are the team which is kind of reviewing the different options and coming to a decision, or whatnot. They're not coming to what they put forward in front of the councillors in terms of what to do. And probably that would that piece of YouTube I made there is a good way of understanding the kind of how the Dutch are in this different mindset, going back to right at the beginning, this different, they're in a different paradigm to what we are. So, right, thank you. That's me finished.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. That was a masterly performance and finished in lots of time. I thought before we ask for questions, I'm just going to stop your screen sharing.
Yeah, just trying to, just see how to do it. Thank you.
So thank you, Patrick. Scott, are you there? And are you just going, could you talk through Connecting Oxford Plus? Because I think, you know, some of the comments were about, surely we need to be restricting car traffic. And Patrick mentioned bus gates, and there's been quite a lot of discussion in Oxfordshire Liveable Streets about extending bus gates, which would really restrict traffic. So Scott, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Alison. Yeah, I'll just go through this really quickly because I just am in awe of Patrick's presentation, and I know I have questions for him, as everyone else does as well. But this is in the genre of responses to this problem that we're facing. So one is something we're very keen on. Oh, I'm going to share my screen. That's disabled. I don't know if you can enable me to share screen.
I will, hold on. I'll just give you co-host. There you are.
Brilliant. Right, share screen. Are you seeing that?
Not yet.
think that's user error, of course. Select a window. Okay, I'm doing that. Share. Okay, got it. Can you see that now?
Yep.
Brilliant. So this is just to say that our view on bus gates and connecting Oxford is informed by the experience of Ghent in Belgium. And although since 1998, they've been doing an awful lot for cycling, including progressively eliminating car parking spaces in the center and introducing segregated cycle lanes, one of their most radical and bold steps only took place 3 years ago in 2017, where they took a sort of Groningen approach, but on a much, much bigger scale of sectorizing the city. And actually, this required a tremendous number of point closures and ANPR cameras to design and enforce. But you could see over on the right-hand side of the screen here, the effect for active travel, which is really what we need to worry about now, you know, as we face this problem of Carmageddon, is the key. And active travel shot up. And I think we've all been talking about the fact that Ghent achieved the cycle modal share that they'd had a plan to achieve for 2030. They achieved it in 2019. So within 2 years of this sectorization. So let me just take that over to what that might look like here in Oxford. So we have a post on our website, Oxfordshire Liveable Streets, called Connecting Oxford Plus. And so we want to really hand it to the authorities for really being bold with Connecting Oxford. Most of it's a really good idea. We certainly support it very enthusiastically, but it isn't a deliberate sectorization of the city. It could be. I mean, it's so close. It's really almost eerie, but it doesn't go the whole way. And so, you know, with our friends, you know, and lots of suggestions from the public, you know, 2 additional bus gate locations have been identified, which would have the effect of sectorizing Oxford all the way within the outer ring road. And the reason that Ghent did this and that we want Oxford to consider doing this is because it makes private car travel a nuisance. So to get from one sector to the other, you've got to retreat to the ring road. So, you know, on the one hand, you're not telling people you can't use your car. They can use their car, and some people will need to use their car, and certainly some traders will need to use their cars, but it's going to be a little bit harder. Now, what they found in Ghent actually is that those car trips are faster now because there's such a big modal shift. It's taken out so much congestion. People are making those journeys faster, even though they have to go around the ring road to get where they're going. And so just to be clear about the bus gates that we have in mind, I think most of you will know there are, in Connecting Oxford as it stands, there are 5 bus gates. 3 are in the city centre to prevent...
We can't see your screen. You've still got Ghent up.
Oh, right. Okay, let me... Now that... Okay, sorry. So here we are. Connecting Oxford has 3 in the center of the city. And it has 1 on Hollow Way, and it has 1 on Marston Ferry Road. And that, by the way, is the so-called inner ring road that Oxford has. And the idea for those Marston Ferry Road and Hollow Way closures, bus gates, is really to facilitate the fast passage of a new bus. And that's great, but actually it ignores the impact that will have on other areas of the city. And it's really all about bus prioritization. And here we are in a world where we need active travel prioritization, you know, certainly in the short term. And so I'm just going to scroll down here and show you what, you know, some of the problems that are highlighted by not doing the sectorization. So here, what you're looking at here is a failure to sectorize the whole of the eastern side of the city, including Headington. And so you get car journeys trying to avoid the Hollow Way closure, which is sort of on the right. I'm going to use my cursor here. Hopefully you can see it. Here's the Hollow Way closure. So you can avoid it in 2 different ways. You can avoid it on the ring road, or you can just rat run through St. Clement's to reach the JR Hospital, for example, or all the employment sites in Headington. So I'll just show you the two bus gates and then I'll be quiet so we can talk about Patrick's presentation. Here are the bus gates, and I'll just enlarge that a little bit. So I don't know if you can see that, but here over on the left-hand side of the screen is the plain, and there's the Cherwell River. And then all you need is a bus gate. The first red circle on the left is called London Place. It's just on the very west-hand side of South Park. And then on the right-hand side of South Park, you have Warnford Lane. And it turns out that those are actually the only two ways to get around the Holloway bus gate. So it is the fact that from the plain all the way to the outer ring road, you only need 3 point closures, one of which is already anticipated in connecting Oxford, that being Holloway. All you have to do is add Warnford Lane and London Place. So, and Alison, I just wanted to say, obviously this webpage is here. If people want to look into it a little bit more, we try and discuss it there. But as you've kindly put in the chat box earlier tonight, we are hosting a discussion with the Deputy Mayor of Ghent tomorrow at noon, at lunchtime. So everyone's welcome to come along to that. He'll be giving a presentation about Ghent and also why he thinks it's a very good plan for a COVID environment. And he'll also be taking questions. And we'll have a little presentation about connecting Oxford as well. So I think probably I'll just stop there if that's okay.
Lovely, thank you, Scott. And I think all of us in all the different active travel groups are really looking at your model and hopefully we will be right behind it to support you in taking this forward, because it seems to me restricting traffic is the only way we're going to solve that problem that Patrick identified. So thank you, Scott. And are there questions to Patrick, Scott, or Suzanne? Please unmute if you've got one. Andy, have you seen any?
Could you very kindly give us that link to the Ghent? You gave some sort of program.
Hubert, I'll send you one by email.
Okay, thanks very much.
I had a question. I'm aware that a lot of this presentation has rightly focused on sort of infrastructural change, and as seen in Ghent, that's had a huge effect. But I think the way that we'll really have that modal shift that we've been talking about is not sort of just imposing things on a top-down level, but also partnering with people and understanding why people travel the way that they currently travel, and having that sort of more community-based focus to understand people more, just because otherwise you run the risk of people getting angry about certain restrictions happening. So in my work, we've created sort of zero carbon developments where we've restricted the amount of parking to try and move people towards bicycle ownership more than just multiple car ownership. And people have just gotten angry, and they've gotten angry at the developer. They've not understood it. They've not had that that sort of inner cultural shift, if you like. So what sort of schemes are out there that are being put in place to sort of help people rather than just imposing structures on them?
Who's going to answer that? Is Suzanne there still or not?
Suzanne, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'll pick up on it. Anyway, I think it's a really important point, and I think you're right. You've got to take people with you, and obviously I know that the experience of the experimental TRO for Walton Street, whereby the consultation wasn't performed in advance, that was really difficult for county council. It was difficult for members. It's been really difficult for officers. It's taken a lot of resource, and I know it's led to a lot of conflict as well. So I wholly agree what we've said about. And we're a very committed active travel community. I think I wholly agree what we've said about being bold, but at the same time, I do agree. I think the behaviour change is really important. I mean, I represent a suburban stroke semi-rural division, and as soon as restrictions are mentioned around traffic or parking, that gets a real backlash. And so I've been trying very carefully just to change my approach and change my language and really be more sympathetic to those real concerns, those day-to-day concerns. So how do I get my child to school before I go to the office, etc. And listening to it. But I think you're right, and I think we could draw upon behavioural science actually a lot more here, and think actually how do we underpin this with some theory of change. And I know that there's discussion about that obviously at a higher, broadly national level, but I think I would be keen to see how we could galvanise that at the local level, because of this, as I said, this really pivotal opportunity where we're seeing people try active travel who wouldn't usually, and we don't want to let that go.
Thank you, Suzanne. Is there another question from anybody? Yes, Liz.
Alison, can I just say a quick word about the campaign quickly before I have to jump off?
Okay, you quickly say.
Sorry, so my name's Charlie. I'm with Green New Deal Oxford Local Hub, and we're working with Alison and Scott and others to put together a campaign around this issue. So just a word to say, please keep your eye out for a petition or online campaign to get involved. And if you have any questions, our email is oxfordgreennewdeal@gmail.com. So yeah, and the national campaign at the moment is called Build Back Better, which is how we have a just and green recovery coming out of COVID-19. Looking forward to meeting more of you in the coming weeks and months.
Lovely, thank you, Charlie.
Can I just intervene quickly there? Sorry, my name's Pete Conway. I live in Headington. Can I just ask Charlie before he goes? So one of the issues that we faced is in introducing the cycle lanes up in Headington, there's been a lot of removal of trees. Again, no pre-consultation with either city or the county council. Would you be basically on board for a conversation about making sure when we're trying to change the infrastructure of the city that we don't lose too many trees in doing that? Because obviously trees we feel are kind of part of our kind of lungs of the city.
Yes, certainly. I'll just put my email in the chat box and then please get in touch. Thanks.
Liz Sawyer, you want to say something?
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me? So I think this one's mostly for Suzanne, but for all of the councillors here. Fantastic explanation of the problems, but we've seen London, Manchester, Brighton, not just big cities, but small towns as well, already getting their implementation in place. What, for you, I mean, Suzanne, it seems very much you're kind of on the message for this. You've said, what are the main sticking points that you feel? I mean, you've mentioned already change management, changing people's attitudes. As we've seen, people's attitudes have been able to be changed phenomenally quickly. People went from looking at China and going, oh my God, lockdown would never happen here, to agreeing with it. 80% of people think it was a good thing and did it and kept with it, to people going, oh, it didn't happen early enough. What do you think are the major, like if you could sum up just a couple of those major hurdles to change, other than people have done it this way and they always want to do it this way? What do you think are the major hurdles that you need to get past in order to make all of these changes that people, that will be good for people? What do you think those are?
Yeah, I think Patrick touched upon one of the main ones, which was the ingrained sort of cultural thinking that these projects take a long period of time, and they're used to long phases of consultation in particular. And I know that that's been a key sticking point, is how do we go forwards with some things which are, let's say, experimental or more bold without that full consultation phase. So I'd say that was one of the key challenges. Time scales, and certainly from all of the correspondence that I've seen, and trying to explain these schemes at let's say at a political level, that there just isn't the understanding of just as I said, you know, the actual what this actually means physically, and what it, hence why, I mean, Patrick's pictures have been very useful and I've circulated those, so actually demonstrating what this actually, the essence of it is, and why we're doing it as well with this urgency. And those are both related. And then I think that I think also coming back to Graham's earlier point around gold plating, and it's so where do we where do we go? You know, how far do we go, and where do we take this, and how does it sit with all of the multiple schemes, some of which have had to be put back? So, for example, the zero emission zone for obvious reasons, and obviously we're already in consultation phase for the Connecting Oxford, which obviously just closed on Sunday. So I think it's sort of pulling that together and thinking, where do we do this in a very short term, and then where do we take it in a longer term, and how do those sit together? That is my sense at the moment. But I do expect that we will hear news within days, if not the next week to 2 weeks, definitely.
About something.
Surely London and Brighton. Hi, sorry, I'm just come down from putting the baby to bed. Surely Brighton and London, everyone like that, they have these similar cultural inertia behind them for making any changes, but they've managed to actually put things in days ago. So I mean, surely that cultural inertia thing isn't an argument against actually just doing something.
Yeah, and I'm not using that as a defensive point to say, no, this is why we're not. And I know that, you know, Oxford's been seen as a vanguard in many previously, historically, in terms of many transport projects. So I agree, and I'm very, very happy to share experiences from those and to be connected with members and officers at those authorities to really understand how they've been able to unlock schemes so quickly. I mean, I know often we come back to TfL with regard to London, and obviously we're working in a two-tier system. I haven't seen such fast-paced moving, I have to say, with our county authorities. I'm not saying that that's a justification in any way, but it's just to say that many of us are there saying, you know, this, we need to act, and we need to do it very, very, very quickly, and highlighting the sense of urgency.
Yeah. Can I just say, most of all, Suzanne, thank you very, very, very much, because you are actually here. You are actually here talking to us, listening to us. You know, the worst thing is that, you know, there aren't a huge number of people actually needed to make this decision and say, yes, we are going to do this. But you're actually here and listening to us. So you are deliberately giving yourself, you know, taking on an incredibly hard job here. So I'm massively grateful to you, and I'm sure a lot of other people are, because you're actually here and listening to, you know, 120 of us over more than that who are all going, please do something.
No, it's great to be here, and also actually a lot of the suggestions and a lot of what has been discussed as well in the chat box, I think are really important for me to take back as well, to get a sense of, you know, collective action. I should also add that we've had, and I mentioned this before, we have had an excellent response to the survey that went out to members across the county. And all of that information is going in a report tomorrow for an urgent meeting as well. So there are, I think the reassurance is there are things happening. It's just that I know we haven't yet had any public announcements that have been made.
So thank you all very much. I mean, it's past 9 o'clock now, and we promised we would stop at 9. I think there's been a huge amount of fantastic information has come out from Suzanne and from Patrick and from the chat and the questions. I mean, I've been recording this, so we will make the recording available. In the recording, we keep the chat, so there'll be lots of things that we will be able to pull out of that. I just finally want to thank everybody who attended and who had questions and weren't able to ask them, but I think this is a really valuable session. Don't forget those events, the one tomorrow and the one on Friday called Why We Cycle, and then keep the pressure up on the County Council and our City Council to make the changes we need. So thank you all very much indeed, and looking forward to seeing you all soon.